Hello and welcome to Michelson Alexander's Election Wash-Up podcast. I'm Jack Banister, Head of Content. To unpack what Labor's win on the weekend means for the sectors in which we work, I'm joined by Head of Government Relations Trystyn Bowe and Senior Associate Elyse Gatt. Hope you enjoy this chat. So Trystyn Bowe, I might start with you as our Head of Government Relations. What can we expect to see from this new Prime Minister based on his election campaign and also his statements since election day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's obvious that Indigenous affairs is something that is a real priority for this Prime Minister. It's something he's called out and he's had his senior ministers call out at every possible opportunity. He also restated their commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart and having an Indigenous voice to Parliament. So I think that feels like something that this emerging cabinet has a real emotional connection to, a real passion about. You know, the new Prime Minister has repeatedly called out aged care. Fixing the aged care crisis is something that he said over and over again through the campaign. The federal ICAC is obviously a massive election commitment and something that previously the Shadow Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, has, pushed for many, many years. So that's a real platform for them. And, of course, climate change is something that this government needs to act on, has been told by the electorate very clearly that it needs to act on, and something that, I think the Labor Party has been incredibly frustrated to see no progress on for a long time, while also, not necessarily bringing their A game to the debate a lot of the time as well.
But for now, we're working with an interim ministry. The speed of the transition into new government is quite scary. So Elyse, could you just talk us through how they are governing in the opening days of the Albanese era?
Sure. So the Prime Minister this morning made a bit of a joke. It was quite funny. He said that that the five of them have had a quick meeting, and then next, I think his intention is to have the full ministry sworn in next Wednesday. But the five so far, so we've got obviously the Prime Minister. Richard Marles, who's been sworn in as Deputy PM and Employment Minister. I think we can expect to see him keep employment. I think that probably means Brendan O'Connor will end up with the defence portfolio in the long run after Wednesday. Katie Gallagher, sworn in as Finance, which was expected, also sworn in this week with as Attorney General and and as Minister for Women. I think we'll probably see Attorney General be passed on to somebody else, but it would be really interesting if they maintain that combination of the finance portfolio with the women's portfolio, especially as that's a huge push by the Teals towards more gender equality and the financial capability of women and improving the financial standing of women in society, including with childcare costs and things like that. So that would be really, really interesting to see how that plays out. And then Penny Wong's Foreign Minister and Jim Chalmers as Treasurer, which they'll keep as well. And then next week, I think we'll probably see, I'm speculating at this stage, but the ones that are pretty sure is Chris Bowen as Energy. He's really respected by industry, so I think we'll see him maintain that. And then Linda Burney as Indigenous Affairs Minister.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Elyse has made, is whether finance and women will remain with the same minister, or whether, in fact, the new Prime Minister has given that to Katie Gallagher as a signal to the Teals, who have called out the advancement of women so predominantly in their platforms. And this is a sign from him to say, I'm taking this seriously. He really has been sending some big signals on this. Today at his press conference, he made a comment about Parliament will sit before the end of July. He's still awaiting advice from PMNC, but he did say that he is trying to run a family-friendly Parliament and avoid school holidays where he can. So he's on it. He's read the Teal writing on the wall.
One of the holes left in the new cabinet is that left by Christina Keneally, who is likely to lose her seat in Fowler and has obviously been the shadow Home Affairs Minister. So what are the implications of that likely to be?
Yeah, it's a significant sign from the electorate not to take their votes for granted. And Christina Keneally is a prominent senior shadow minister. She was the Premier of New South Wales, and this is a hole that they're going to have to fill. I imagine there's quite a lot of internal wrangling going on at the moment to figure out where that's going to land. And I think, you know, to Elise's point about Miles and defence, you know, that's the kind of stuff that you will see potentially as in part a result of this, that, you know, there's a few kind of choice portfolios. Who gets them is an interesting shuffle always. And, you know, I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether the new PM trusts someone who's held similar portfolios before in the past with this, or whether this is about to be a really big promotion for someone.
And talking about this election without talking about the Teals would be absolute folly, and they've already come up in almost everything that has been said. So 7 women have been elected under that Teal banner. What can we expect to see from them throughout this new parliament?
So I think they'll be holding the government to account, especially with things like the implementing the recommendations from the Respect at Work report, and on climate change as well. I think that's going to be really important. The biggest thing I think we can say about the Teals and the strength of them is that they have been given a mandate by the community. This parliament, it's not just this government that's been given a mandate to do something on climate change or any of the other policies they brought through, but it's this wave of independence is really capturing community sentiment. And I think it's a real move away from that the John Howard days of you know, occasionally there might be some, you know, the quiet battlers come out and vote for one way or another. It's a subset of the community. Well, it's most of the community. It's not it's a subset. It's the community coming out and saying, all right, enough's enough. If neither of the big parties are going to do something about climate change, neither of the big parties are going to do anything to help women and women's safety and doing anything about family violence, well, then we're going to get someone in that does. And I think that's what their power is going to be, is that they are genuinely a voice of the community. And if the government doesn't listen to them, they're going to have to pay that price at the next election.
I think Elyse is absolutely correct. And, you know, Julie Bishop made a really good point on election night, which was that instinctively, if the Liberal Party was more progressive on climate change and, you know, more open to electing women, these women naturally would have been Liberal members. You know, in a different set of circumstances, you easily could have seen many of them running for the Liberal Party. And I think, as much as this is a message to the whole parliament and all the major parties that climate action is critical and is a top priority for the electorate, it's also a real sign to the Liberal Party that they need to do better for women. And
obviously in the immediate post-election wash-up, a lot of the chat is about the House of Reps and the new government, but we're going to end up with an interesting composition in the Senate where we're looking at up to 12 Greens seats, which would be enough to give Labor a working majority if they were able to pull one other crossbencher along. But Elyse, we were talking around the water cooler this morning, and past history and experience, particularly with the CPRS, tells us that that might not be as straightforward for Labor as we think. Yeah, and it's going to be, I think there's a sense in the community that, you know, the Greens, in having a balance of power or control of the Senate in a way, will push Labor to the left and push them to do more. But the thing about the Labor Party is that they're a centre-left party. They are a pragmatic party. They still have to think about things like the economy and you know, any kind of transition in the climate space has to factor in, you know, things like the economy and jobs and ensuring the industry, you know, that we don't just wipe out a whole industry immediately and force not only our country but the region into energy poverty. So there's a lot to think about there. Then you've got the Greens, who are very strong on their position. They want zero, they want no coal, they want no more coal power generation, no more mining, no more gas exploration. And so I think any time that a party says just puts a blanket no on something and then won't, it's a worry about how they're going to negotiate. Will they negotiate? We saw with the CPRS in 2009 that it was a policy that, you know, worldwide economists said this will embed climate action into the Australian economy.
problem is it did actually come with some items, some line items, which was to incentivise traditional energy industry to transition. So it was, and the Greens said that was giving, you know, dirty coal and dirty industry money, but you have to incentivise them. Otherwise, they won't go into transition, especially, you know, 15 years ago. These days, a lot of the industry has these net zero policies, so it's a bit different. But by the way, back to 2009, though, their lack of the Greens' inability to move away from what they saw as a black and white issue that, you know, polluters shouldn't get money, meant that we didn't end up with a CPRS. So what else is? And I'm just interested to see what happens with that on a range of issues in the new government.
I think it will be interesting as well seeing other governments across the country who now have not got a majority in their upper houses, and I, you know, would call on Victoria as an example, where the government has had to wrangle a pretty tricky crossbench at times, and the Greens agenda in Victoria has not particularly progressed through this parliament. But someone like Fiona Patten, the leader of the Reason Party in Victoria, is incredibly talented and, you know, very skilled at negotiating with government, finding fine compromises, and, you know, achieving a lot of outcomes, because I'm sure she learned from that experience and saw that sacrificing the good for the perfect means you get nowhere a lot of the time.
And Elyse, you've already talked a little bit about the energy industry there, and you obviously work a lot in our hydrogen and energy team. So what are your early premonitions about how this Senate will shape the future of the energy industry?
It's going to be really, really interesting, and it's an opportunity, but there's a lot of risks too. So as I said, industry, most of industry has now have their own targets and their own positions, and in a lot of ways, industry has been driving climate action in Australia and around the world for the last few years. While governments were in deadlock, industry has pushed forward. So I think the Greens need to be aware of that, and I think it's an opportunity for industry to speak to the Greens and to really show them what they have been doing, and to try and I think there's like a really, really important education piece around some of the new technologies, and I think the new government and the Senate need to be technology agnostic. They need to be open to a range of technologies and a range of ways to achieve emissions reductions. And I think any kind of blanket, no, that's not going to happen, or any kind of discounting of any technology is going to end us, going to put us into a pretty tricky space. So I think we need to. This new government has an opportunity. I think they should be looking into other economies that is working really well. So Germany, California, different economies where they have these different mix of technologies and taxes and incentives to really come up with what the best option is for Australia.
Anthony Albanese, I think, is someone who genuinely believes in unions. You know, it's not an accident that he is the leader of the Labor Party. He's incredibly passionate about workers' rights, and I think everything needs to be done in the frame of this is not a Prime Minister who is going to be comfortable taking any action that doesn't have jobs thought through. You know, he's not going to dump a whole industry and move to something else, because he's always going to be thinking about what are the implications for the workforce and, you know, the people who rely on these sectors for their jobs. Yeah. And there's, you know, as you so beautifully articulated, there's absolutely a way of managing a transition that will keep the sector, will advance clean energy, but also keep people in employment.
Transitioning immediately to 100% renewable energy is impractical. It can't happen, and it will force, it will have terrible economic implications, and it will force a lot of our region into, as I said before, energy poverty. And so, jobs is important, absolutely, but it's also about having affordable energy, affordable clean energy, and that's where that technology agnostic part comes in. We need to start being creative and industry is being creative. Industry has ideas, and you know, I think there's a lot of left-leaning politics will say, don't speak to industry, don't engage with industry. You know, that they're just the dirty polluters out to make money. Well, no, things have changed significantly, and industry are driving this change, and they can see that they'll be left behind if they don't become cleaner. So yeah, I think this government just has to work with industry.
You know, it's not unusual to see that the community and, you know, a lot of the time businesses are ahead of the government. So I think as much as this feels like a moment in time that's quite unique, the public is way ahead of both major parties on climate action. This is a cycle that we see. The community generally does get ahead of the politics, and I just think we're going to need to work through that and let the politicians catch up and do so in a way that, you know, achieves good outcomes for as many people as possible and the climate.
So there's something you mentioned there just about Albanese's belief fundamentally in jobs and unions and that being a real focus. Clearly that's something that's very important for any business that's going to work with this government to include in their communications. Is there anything else that you would include in that category that's going to be central to this government that anyone looking to work with them needs to be cognizant of?
Anthony Albanese is, I think, a really important marker in this country's kind of future history, because he's, you know, the first public housing kid to be the Prime Minister. It's an incredible, incredible step we've taken. I think there's a lot to be gained from approaching someone on their own terms and understanding their frame of reference. And so, you know, which I think speaks to like the issue Elyse just referred to, energy poverty. You know, this is a man who grew up in a really difficult financial situation. He's not going to do things that make the cost of living impossible for people. He's working hard to make sure that the next generation can find a way of affording homes. You know, I think cost of living is a real issue for him. And I think he's the kind of person who is always minded to, how do you let the next generation have more than you have? So I think education, training, really important for him. I think those are my headlines. But yeah, I would always encourage people to, whichever member of parliament or, you know, political party you're meeting with, it's really valuable to look into that person's background. You know, it sounds trite, maybe I'm teaching people to suck eggs at this point, but like, look at their first speech to parliament. Most people will tell you what they're there for. And, you know, whether you agree or disagree with them, every person in parliament is in parliament for a reason, to achieve something. And if you can align your agenda to their agenda, you're going to have the best chance of success.
Going in with an idea, going in with an ask and a solution.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being aware of what the solution that they've already proposed. So working in with what has the government already said that they want to achieve. You know, they want to achieve 40% emissions, fine. How is your company aligned with that? What are you doing, and what are the technologies that you're using to get there? That's so important. Going in with specific asks and specific points that you want to make. This is going to be a very busy government. These first 3 months are going to be a lot. This government. So I think that's just so important. And I'd also be, you know, I'll be encouraging my clients to be talking to the public service as well.
Absolutely.
There'll be incoming government briefs going up to Parliament. You know, get in on that and see what's on there. See what the current situation is, and work in that way.
I think a lot of people in a very well-intentioned way approach government with either, this is what I want to do and no further thought, or how do I help you? And government goes, I don't have time to come up with how you can help me. So you really do need to go in with those three pieces of the puzzle, right? It's like, what do I want? How does that support what you want? And also a flexibility that if government turns around and goes, I was thinking this instead, you can go, I can roll with that, you know?
So we've already mentioned a lot about climate, teals and women. Are there any other wins that we should be cognizant of after this election in the way that the votes have fallen?
Oh, the National Party has had an incredible show of this election. As much as the Liberal Party has been sent a really clear message that they need to do better on, in particular, climate and women, the National Party has really been sent a message that they've remembered their base, they've spoken to their base, they've held their base. They've done very well And I think it's interesting to see what happens when, because, I think there's a lot of discourse about the political parties' bases shifting, and the Nationals have retained their existing base. They've gone, this is what we do.
I think, though, one of the positives that's come out of this election is that rejection of the major parties, and that the community has a voice, and the community is done with not having their voice heard. And I think, that might not be a positive for either particular party, but I think it's a great thing for Australia as a whole.
I also think the major parties have such an opportunity to take that message and, re-energise themselves. Like, I think it's incorrect that this is the marker of the demise of the two-party system. It is if they keep playing ball the same way they have been. And I am hopeful that all of the smart people on all sides of politics will sit down and go, oh, we need to stop taking the electorate for granted. We need to make policy based on what matters to the electorate and, be more responsive and more on the ground in those seats.
They've been given a mandate to do what the community wants, not just to lead the country. And I think I'm really hoping what we see is a move away from that old school John Howard way of leadership, that we know what you need.
Yes. And
we're going to tell you. And I think it'll be a dawning of a new day for Australian politics.
Yeah, and, I really am hopeful that that's right. I think, we were discussing this morning how much politicians' words matter. They choose them very carefully, or at least they should. And that's why communications is so critical. But, Anthony Albanese was saying this morning that he doesn't want a confrontational parliament. He wants to work with people. He wants to be done with the way everyone has just been, I'm paraphrasing him at this point, but, kind of sniping at each other. And I think there's something really heartening to see him stand up on day one, like literally hour one of having been sworn in, and say, I want to do this better. I want to run this parliament better. And let's stop now. So I agree with you.
There's so much conflict fatigue. Everyone's just so over it, especially when there are so many important things that we need to get after. You're watching people fight over ridiculous things while the climate is getting warm, the world is getting warmer, and women aren't being listened to, and people are being, family violence is still a huge issue in Australia. But they've heard that, and we're going to see a more collaborative parliament.
So at the risk of totally knocking off insiders with our couch and our setup, I might get a final observation from you, Trystyn.
My takeaway from this election is the Labor Party has been given an opportunity to implement its agenda with some pretty strong caveats from the electorate. They are going to be held to account this time, and, I really hope that the new PM manages to make this a more collaborative parliament and get some real runs on the board for climate change.
My final thought is that with every new government, this is a great opportunity for industry and community groups and NGOs to get in there and get their voices heard. The industry and any kind of organisation needs to really look at what the community is elected, who they've elected and what for, and then go into politics and help hold them to account. And that's a huge opportunity right now.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, the two of you. I might finish off with an observation of my own, which is that there is a Robert Frost poem called Taking from the Top to Broaden the Base, which we could just lump across a few desks in Canberra to sum up what's happened over the last few days. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been really fun to chat on a Monday morning. If you aren't liked and subscribed to Michelson Alexander Explains, please make sure you do that on YouTube and on whichever platform you get your podcasts through. And we will be back soon with more analysis of all things strategic communications, politics and public affairs. Thanks.